For the latest developments, we're joined by the SABC News Specialist Correspondent, Sophie Mokoena. Sophie, very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. So, while this, of course, involves Kenyan nationals, but the relations between South Africa and the US, again, in the spotlight, a relationship that appears to have been deteriorating over time.
Well, I think the problem here is what was communicated to the State Department in the United States of America. Because when you look at the reaction of the State Department, they are reacting to reports that two US officials were arrested. They are not talking about these Kenyans who came to South Africa through wrong means, because they indicated that they are coming for holiday as tourists. However, they knew that they were going to offer services here. And therefore, I think the information that was communicated to the State Department was not that clear. And therefore, I think what's needed here is for the US to send a proper information, and this has to be done by the embassy that is based in South Africa, officials from embassy, to clarify this matter, because the two officials were found at this venue. And this is not the embassy or the consulate of the American government in Sandton or in Pretoria. It is a building in Kelvin where you have this NGO that's operating there, interviewing these Afrikaners who want to go to United States of America as refugees. They started this process using a B&B, and they've moved to a better venue. And that's where the sting happened. And the two officials were there at that moment when these so-called Kenyans were arrested. And therefore, when they were asked to give documents to clarify themselves or identify themselves, the two officials, apparently it took time for them to give the officials, law enforcement agencies, their passports to prove that they are here legally and they work at the embassy. After that was clarified, they were not arrested, but the 7 so-called Kenyans were arrested. 6 of them were deported around lunchtime. The last person left at around 5 p.m. to Nairobi, Kenya.
And when you look at this particular refugee program, as it's been termed, right, the African Refugee Program, one wonders, though, when we look ahead to the future, what happens, for example, if the Republicans were to lose control of the House in the elections in 2028 and there is a Democratic Party president? And also, when you answer that question, is it then at the time, if, you know, the president says we are not continuing with this, can they board a plane and simply come back home?
They can't. If you apply for a refugee status, you are granted. To go back to your country, it's a very difficult process. And therefore, there are concerns that next year, during the midterm elections in November, if the Republicans lose the Congress and you have the Democrats, clearly many executive orders that were signed by President Trump will be reversed because they will have numbers in the Congress. And you can see, based on elections that have happened since January this year, the Republicans are not doing well. The Democrats are doing well. We saw the push by the former president of the US, former President Barack Obama. We saw the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. We saw the former Vice President, Kamala Harris, pushing, and they are creating an environment that is conducive and reminding the Americans that your woes now that you are complaining about the current government, you can reverse all this during the midterm elections. And therefore, there's going to be a huge challenge for people who used the current executive orders in the United States of America to go to the US. The question is, what will the Democrats do? Because this is something that many Democrats don't agree with in terms of the processes, because this process is discriminatory in its nature, because only Afrikaners are allowed to get refugee status in America, people coming from the continent. And therefore, why do you only single out Afrikaners, but you don't want other refugees coming from a war-torn country like Sudan, the DRC, and many other hotspots on the continent. And secondly, to come back when we've done that according to the UN regulations and policies, it is very difficult. And therefore, this is going to create a problem. But also, when you look at this issue, Bonyiwe, it does create tension between South Africa and Kenya. Because some few years ago, the Kenyans were complaining that to get visas to travel to South Africa is very difficult. But South Africans can travel to Kenya without visas. And therefore, when President Ramaphosa visited Kenya during the state visit, he engaged his counterpart, William Ruto, and there was a relaxation of visa regulations. And now these so-called Kenyans who have abused the system, we are going to see South Africa looking at this issue. I spoke to an official from DERCO who told me that they are going to take this matter through their diplomatic means. But perhaps a strong statement came from the ANC Secretary General, Fikile Mbabulula, today when he was addressing the Youth League Congress in Limpopo, sending a warning that this should not, you know, President Trump's actions should not lead to a situation where Africans are divided. And I think he was having this issue in mind based on the fact that it will cause tension between Kenya and South Africa. Let's listen at what Mbalula had to say this afternoon.
Africa must stop to become beggars of others. If we are so powerful, we will not be a walkover by the United States of America. South Africa must not fight alone. It must fight with the rest of the African continent. It must never accept to be isolated from the rest of the African continent. We must not allow Donald Trump to isolate us from the African continent. We must fight as the African continent for our own African renaissance. Comrades, we must stand up against neocolonialism, and that cause must be championed by the youth.
There you have it, Bonyiwe. I think you can hear the passion. It was based on what transpired today, because really this can cause tension between South Africa and Kenya. After, as I pointed out a year ago, President Ramaphosa engaging his counterpart, William Ruto, to say, let's find a way to resolve this issue of visas. And unfortunately, this is where we are now. But also when I look at the pictures that we got, what was surprising for me, one person with identification claiming that he was born in Burkina Faso, he's an American, he's a Kenyan, you don't know. And those are behaviors of the agencies for the American government.
An interesting story there, Sophie, and one that certainly will get the continent talking once again, especially when it comes to how do you deal with the relations with the U.S. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for talking to us, SABC News Specialist Correspondent Sophie Mokoena.